Hi, everyone. Um, Thanks for coming. And is everyone here a Rubyist, or you have a mixed crowd? I always like talking in front of Rubyist. It's a really interesting group of people with very original way of thinking, and I'm really grateful for this opportunity. Um, and I don't know how many of you actually are interested just in bots, and we can talk Ruby as well. But I got involved with bots a while ago, and of course, Ruby was my natural language of choice. Um, so tonight we're going to go over some details regarding the issues and challenges with bots as a technology, and then we'll review some Ruby code that I kind of wrote in the attempt to solve some of the problems that I will bring up. I also want to encourage everyone to interrupt me in case something's not clear or my thick accent is not eligible, and then we can try and explain what the idea is behind the slide. But I'll try and speak legibly. Can you hear me well? Good. Okay. So bots for business. About me, I'm the presenter. I call myself a holistic software developer. So you may be thinking, like, what does that mean? Basically, through the years, I've developed this approach to take all aspects of software development into consideration. So and I'll explain what that means. Basically, I'm focusing 50% of my time on analysis, and then the other 50% on process, and the last 50% on engineering. I don't want any of these things to get neglected, because earlier in my career, I suffered consequences of kind of considering some of these areas less importance. Now I think they're all equally important. So now, okay, sorry. Oops, how do we go back?
Small button at the bottom.
Mm-hmm. Now you're probably thinking to yourself, this guy really sucks at math, so how can he be a good developer? But I'll explain what I mean by this arithmetic. With analysis, I've learned to adopt the approach of measuring twice and cutting once. In the early days, I was eager and passionate, and as soon as I get exposed to a problem, I would just jump in and start cutting code, and then later on see if it fits. So cut first, measure later, not a good approach that I've learned throughout the years. So today I'm taking a deep breath, measuring things, measuring them again, then I cut. As far as the process goes, of course, continuous delivery, which implies all the methodologies and using various tools and platforms to ensure that the process is well engineered. And which brings us to engineering, where I've learned to appreciate purity in programming. Basically, try to avoid unwanted side effects, which probably some of you understand what I'm talking about. So these three areas are, when I think about them, I'm not considering them in isolation. I am actually allowing these three areas to influence and inform each other. And in the end, I'm kind of reaping 150% yield. So this is my bragging point. Also, I'm very big on fighting what I consider two principal enemies of software delivery, which would be hidden assumptions and tight coupling with operational interface. So these are two things that I learned are always degrading or affecting the quality of the delivery. And in particular, hidden assumptions are very nasty, but also I've worked on a lot of projects where tight coupling with the operational interfaces quickly paints us into a corner. So I'm trying to avoid these things consciously. Okay, so this enough about me. I'm going now into the presentation. And I'm starting with the sentiment that mobile is first nowadays. In the old days when mobile was last, it was a novelty. And so we were always focusing on building apps that are desktop centric. And then maybe later on, we kind of shoehorn them into a mobile device. But later on, we realized that mobile is very important for the business. So we now try and start designing for mobile first, and then progressively enhance them and give the apps more capabilities. So that's kind of the norm nowadays. Also, at the same time, we are seeing, and this graph is, I think, from a year ago. So today, I'm assuming it's probably even a bigger percentage, but we are realizing that mobile is eating the desktop. So we had last year almost 56% overall time spent on mobile versus 44% on desktop, and that number probably is increasing. So also we hear people talk about the peak app. So what does that mean? There was about 10 years ago an app boom with the release of iPhone and opening the App Store and people getting excited, and before you knew it, everybody started talking about, oh, there must be an app for that. And so there was a big excitement about apps. But there are some signs today that the boom might be over. Basically, some stats, and this is from June last year that I was able to gather, show that the almost half of the mobile users download 0 apps per month. So people kind of, almost half of the population kind of given up on even trying new apps. They don't feel like it's useful, and they're just sticking to the apps they already have on their mobile device. Also, there's the identified retention problem with apps, which means if you get your customers, somehow talk them into downloading your app and using it, after 6 months, 90% on average, you lose them. So that's also a big problem with this app technology. So now I'm going to go through the list of why are mobile apps considered frustrating for many people. They're difficult to discover, unlike websites. You have to make an effort to actually find the app that you think will be useful. Once you discover the app, it's difficult for us to actually evaluate the app. So apps don't have this try before you buy model. You can kind of look at screenshots and read reviews, but if you really want to evaluate it, you have to buy it. And if you decide to buy it, then you have to spend some time downloading, installing. You have to be on Wi-Fi, etc. And once you download, install, you have to spend some time configuring it. So okay, you've installed it and it's on your phone. Now you want to use it. Sometimes you're swiping back and left, right. Where is that app? You're trying to find it. So it's difficult to find on a mobile device on the home screen. And once you evaluate it, and let's say you realize, wait a minute, this is kind of crappy, I don't want this. Now you have to uninstall it. Now you try and get your money back. How does that work? It's kind of, you get what you pay for. And if you decide to keep it, then you pretty soon will hit this wall where it stopped working because you have to upgrade. So you're on this kind of upgrade treadmill. So all these reasons make mobile apps kind of frustrating as a technology, as a solution. So now the question became, seeing that we're hitting this wall and it doesn't seem to be growing the way people are hoping, is there an alternative? And we started realizing that instant messaging and chat are technologies that are kind of interesting at this point. And we also have some stats that show that a lot of people spend a lot of their digital minutes, online minutes, actually chatting, not really messing around with apps, but just chatting, right, texting. And from the business perspective, the business always is interested in following the market. If the market is going in that direction, then before you know it, the money will follow. And business offering will follow. So we realized that all of our customers are already conditioned and used to, and it's a second nature for people to chat with friends and family, coworkers. So that's already kind of ingrained, and people are conditioned. And now, wouldn't it be nice if they could also chat with their services the same way? Because that's where the bulk of the market is. Billions of people, actually. And now all of a sudden we hear about chatbots and conversational commerce, which means conducting commercial activities via conversation, conversing. What are the advantages of this conversational commerce, which is kind of a brand new technology that is nascent nowadays? First of all, it's convenient because there's nothing to download. If you want to engage in a service, you can just start conversing with the service. There's no need to download anything and install it, as we talked about apps. Nothing to configure. There is no need to authenticate because you're already authenticated on the channel, so you just jump right into the conversation. They know who you are. So the barriers to entry are really kind of dropping to the floor at this point. There's nothing to learn because everybody already knows how to text back and forth. It's second nature to all of us. And there's also nothing to purchase because you don't need to, all of a sudden, oh no, you need an iPhone if you want to use this, or you need Android. No, I mean, there's nothing to purchase. Texting, pretty much the same for any client. And also there are no upgrades. So, excuse me, usually with apps, we need beefier and beefier clients, and Instagram stops working because I'm on this version of the phone and blah, blah, blah. With texting, all of that is a non-issue, right? Also, if we have any subscriptions, we can just cancel them, but we don't have to pay for anything if we don't like it. And it's kind of easy to get into this try before you buy mindset. Even if it's a paywalled service, we can always cancel. We can okay, I tried this service, I'm not impressed, I'm canceling. Also, very interesting, it could be voice activated, which is also a trendy thing nowadays with Alexa and Google Allo and all these other services where you can talk to the device and the device talks back. There are also advantages of this technology over GUI or graphical user interface. And I'll quickly go through an example just to illustrate a very, very trivial example. Let's say I need to set up my alarm clock. If I'm using GUI or a traditional app on my iPhone, I need to go through a number of steps. So the first step, I need to unlock my phone. And my phone is always refusing to recognize my fingerprint, so I have to remember the code, and it's always like, try again, okay. Okay, finally I'm in somehow. Now I need to find the clock app somewhere on the device. Okay, so I find this home app and I activate it. Now I have to find the alarm tab. And once I activate that, it's gonna actually set itself to the current time, right? Which when I was taking this screenshot was 2:10 p.m. Now I need to, if you go back, you will see that there's a plus button there. So I need to activate that one to add an alarm. All right, so that's step number 4. All right, now I'm adding the alarm. I'm scrolling up and down to specify the hour when I want to be woken up. Okay, I'm settling on 6 o'clock. Step 6, I need to set the minute. Okay, 6:30, up and down. Step 7, hey, don't forget to make sure it's AM, not PM. So a lot of careful messing around and interacting and just doing a lot of careful manual labor. And finally, okay, now I have my alarm set. Great. Very convenient, fantastic technology. Okay, if I'm doing the same using conversational user interface or CUI, I'm just saying, Siri, wake me up tomorrow morning at 6:30. Done. So it's unbeatable in that way, that it's very direct, very straightforward. You don't have to manipulate anything. You just kind of say what you want and you are done. So this is one of the, yes? Sorry? Yeah, but it's easier to just say. Yeah, and if we get to the point where it's as Facebook is trying to get the technology to read our minds, then we will have 8 whatever micro thoughts in our head. Sorry, what was that?
You still have to unlock your phone, right?
No.
No?
No.
Then I can set your alarm for you.
Sure. Sure. You can grab my phone and take photos and flood it with photos. It's not that locked down, right? So I better make sure I don't lose my phone. Or if I lose it, you can set my alarm and I won't have it, so it won't affect me. So this is from the sort of everyday usage. But if we now look into what are the advantages or benefits for the business? In addition to what we already talked, if we are going to flip from graphical to text, then we don't need to worry about all these technologies, Angular and React, MobX, etc. Because we're not, building any graphical representations. So I don't know about your experiences, but I work at Staples, and there's huge teams, mobile teams and desktop, working around the clock, wrestling with React and MobX and Angular, and blah, blah, blah. So it costs a lot of money, and it's an endless kind of hamster wheel of constantly upgrading and keeping up to date. So from the business perspective, it's fairly attractive, when you say you can cut off all these expenses and ongoing maintenance with your GUI if you can just flip over to text. Text doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. It displays on any device, and you don't care about the fonts, and you don't care about the colors, just text, right? Or if it's voice, it's just voice. Yeah, whether you type it or read it, it's just text. So another thing is that is interesting is the screenless user interface, where you don't even need the screen, because traditionally, screens as technology were traditionally introduced for consumption. Going to the movies, watching TV, reading something off the screen. But only with the advent of handheld smartphones did we actually get brainwashed into touching screens and manipulating them, which is kind of odd and kind of awkward. So now we're seeing this move away from screens and just talking and saying, Alexa, tell me when's my next bus arriving or something like that. You don't need a screen, And even, if you ask Alexa to show you the map, it can show you. You can throw the map on the screen, but you don't have to manually reach out and touch things on the screen, which feels more natural. Also, another big bane of today's business, especially a retail like Staples, our huge problem is performance. People are nowadays expecting sub-second response to everything, and that's a big problem. Snappy response is a huge deal, and we are losing a lot of business if there's a glitch in something. Is people just very impatient and abandon the shopping or whatever it is. With bots, that's not much of an issue. Why is that? Anyone? Any ideas? Actually, with bots, if it's a snappy response, it's kind of detrimental, because if I type a message and I send to someone, if I get immediate response, I feel a bit offended. I'm like, you didn't even read this. It's just kind of knee-jerk. You're expecting somebody to kind of read that, think about it, maybe turn around, look up, come back with the answer. So it's okay for bots to take some time, right? It's not a big deal. Nobody says, oh, I need right away to hear what this bot has to say. Yeah, so take its sweet time. I'm fine with that. I actually appreciate it. I think you did some legwork and you're paying attention, you're carefully crafting your response. That's what most people tend to experience with a conversational interface. So all that being said, we still see today, when you look at, when I look at what's available, and I was keeping track and I was kind of following what's going on, most of the bots I've seen today being launched and available on the market are focused on individual users. It's all kind of consumer oriented. And this is kind of, from what we've seen so far, kind of setting them up for a failure. And we see a lot of failure. I have a huge number of bots that I've been testing and interacting that if I talk to them today, they're all dead. They're just failures, like total failures. People just yank them. So obviously not happening for some reason. And one of the reasons is the current state of the natural language processing technology is pretty immature. I mean, we are in the early days, and even though there's a lot of research and a lot of work being done on the NLP front, we still are seeing very flaky results. So bots, a lot of bots tend to be confusing and frustrating when we try to use them. Even the simplest interactions, if we try and do something really simple and no-brainer, they can quickly spiral out of control and deteriorate in all kinds of weird corners. And the users end up being disenchanted and kind of like never even think about trying again. So, you know, I pretty much, first impressions, we give it one, you're given one shot, and if it doesn't work, people never consider trying it again. And that's why we're seeing a lot of this kind of botched attempts to offer that service. So here's my example. One of the bots that I was testing. There's a lot of back and forth before this screenshot, but this bot is telling me, okay, Alex, I have a couple more questions. Do you have time? And I reply, yes. And the bot says, obviously. And I'm like, obviously what? And the bot is like, nothing, just none. And I give it 5 minutes, 10 minutes, nothing. Then I'm like, are you still there? And the bot is like, right where you left me. Okay, fantastic. I'm saying, let's carry on. 5 minutes silence, radio silence. I'm like, are you still up for it? And the bot is like, I'm not sure, but I'll do my best to learn. I'm like, to learn what? Dead silence. I lost you again. The bot read it. Oh, sorry. Pressed the wrong button. And after this last question, this died, and the bot became permanently unresponsive. There's no way we could reboot this bot. Just dead. And never again can this bot come to life as far as my contact with this bot. It's just like I can keep typing and sending. No, it's dead. So it's easy for bots to like shoot themselves in the foot or paint themselves in a corner, however you want to call it. And I mean, why would I ever try this again, right? I'm like, no, forget it. Especially if it was something that I really wanted to do. And I'm like, is there an app for this? Because I just can't get this done through this stupid bot. So what's the reason for this fiasco? Basically, I think this is the misplaced focus of the bot creator trying to serve me, human user, by pretending to be yet another human. Like, okay, we're going to fool this guy. He's going to think he's talking to a real person. And you can see the casual tone of the messages the bot is sending me. There's a faux human avatar, like a picture of a pretty girl. And I'm like, oh yeah, I'm talking to a real representative. No, it fails. It just falls apart. It doesn't work well. So, sorry. Any questions? No, okay. Now, from the point of view of a bot designer or somebody who wants to actually carry this on and continue working on this and offering the service, you quickly realize that people are fickle. And people keep changing their minds in the middle of the conversation. That's how we are. You just can't help it. That's human nature. And you quickly discover that. Because you think when you're building a bot, okay, I'm going to say this and then they're going to say that. Not really. You're in for a big surprise, always. And even if you talk to human representatives, service representatives, customer support, who are very, very experienced, they always face challenge. They tell me it's very tough to feel this call and to actually get this resolved. People are very unpredictable and not that easy to deal with, especially if it's not face-to-face, right? If it's over a wire. So my findings are that bots, as we have them today, stand very little or no chance at all to deal with all the quirks and foibles that humans throw at them. And humans will throw at them all kinds of things that you wouldn't believe. Once we look at the logs, what's coming in, we just scratch your head like, I don't believe this. This is unreal. But that's what it is, right? You can't change that. So I would say that the state of artificial intelligence would have to advance significantly before we could rely on bots to bring them back and say, okay, now you deal with this and figure it out, make sure it doesn't fall apart. I don't believe we are, yeah, we have artificial intelligence that can play chess or the game of whatever, checkers, but it's kind of open-ended, free-form chat situation, it just fails miserably, totally fails. So what do we do in the meantime? Because we've seen that apps are kind of, the app boom is kind of over. At the same time, even people who are using apps are becoming so finicky and so expecting phenomenal, snappy performance that we just cannot master from that. But we need to continue scaling and offering services. We just can't keep throwing people at it because, for example, at Staples, if you have this huge operation and now you have a lot of customers complaining and sending all these inquiries, what happened with this, what about that, blah, blah, blah. You just can't keep up with the volume. So the idea would be use technology, but like, what do we do in the meantime, right? So the way I look at things is switch or turn the tables and stop focusing on individual people and trying to charm the pants off and be this kind of charming little chatty bot. And instead, let's focus on building bots for business, which is a much more specific discipline. And the question is, okay, so why do we want to do that? Because I think they're easier to tame. As far as I've demonstrated here in my mind, bots for free-range people are very, very difficult to design and build. And in my experience, when you're in a business context, it's kind of a little bit easier to tame that. And I'll explain what I mean by that. Not to mention they're very helpful for the business. As I mentioned, the businesses needs to scale. Also, if we are building this, much more likely to get funding from the business than from some venture capitalist who thinks that somebody will be ordering pizza all day long through your bot. Now, first, let me explain how I see this. In general, I split bots into two families, kind of two categories. One is what they call the concierge bot. Everybody knows what a concierge is. Another one is what I call the butler bot. So these are very different kind of services. Concierge is loyal to the corporation. So that's somebody who's hired by the business, loyal to the business. On the other hand, butler is loyal to the individual. So it's the other side of the fence. And we have this kind of uneasy balance between the interest of the individual versus the interest of the business or the corporation. So the butler is focused on learning about its owner's habits. That's if you hire a butler, the first thing they would, if they're good, they would try and learn all about you to keep their job, right? They focus on detecting your recurrent behavioral pattern. Oh, the master is doing this at that time. They like to do that, blah, blah, blah. So they learn, right? And the butler is trained to respect the preferences. So if you have certain preferences, they should memorize them. They should not always do a faux pas. And you're like, I told you I don't want that tea brought into my bedroom. etc. Also, we see the ButlerBot stars in many Hollywood movies, science fiction, and it needs totally heavy-duty AI because it's totally like conversant and can talk about philosophy, poetry, the Beatles, whatever you want. So, you know, it's kind of science fiction, but it's very, very interesting and very seductive. On the other hand, Concierge focused on learning about corporate goals, and because it's in a corporate employ, and focused on consistent customer service. Trained to detect business opportunities, cross-sell, upsell, all these tricks, and also trained to set the tone of the conversation. It's very important for the bot to be able to do that. In other words, I would say that a concierge bot is responsible for establishing the conversational protocol. So the protocol is, you probably know that, but it's a bit more formalized way of communication. It's not free-form chatting. So because of that, we don't think it needs beefy AI as much as the Butler bot would need. Because we want to build a bot with a narrow focus, not like wide open. Let's talk about anything and see where we get. An example that comes to mind is like somebody like a medical receptionist. Everybody had experience interacting with medical receptionist. It's a concierge, right? It works for the medical office, doctor's office, and the receptionist, when you approach them, they set the tone of the conversation by letting you know that there is certain conversational protocol, and they do that by asking for pertinent information. They will ask you, what's your name, insurance number, whatever, phone number, date of birth, etc. And they're impervious to any attempts to spark up irrelevant conversation. So if you start, usually if you try and talk about, oh, did you see what that sea lion grabbing that girl in Steve's blah, they were like, sir, I'm sorry, we have, this is the place of business. We have a lot of people waiting. I can't chat with you now. Please give me your name, your medical, whatever, health insurance number, and we'll take it from there. And if the visitor refuses to comply, then, I'm sorry, but we have a lot of people waiting. Could you please leave, get your act together, come back. We can deal with you. So this is a bit more formalized and a bit more serious, and hopefully much narrower problem domain, right? And that's where we're shooting for. And hopefully now we require rudimentary neural language processing technology, which is where we're at today. We have very rudimentary capabilities available to us. What are the challenges? We're discovering that even rudimentary natural language processing is a huge challenge. For example, this is Google Assistant, big, mighty Google. Somebody says, send me weather daily at 7:15 a.m. Let's see, weather, conjunction, expressing a doubt or choice between alternatives. Do you really like to get this every day? No. So, that is a very, very specific scenario, and even that one is open to like spectacular failure. And I mean, if Google cannot deal with this, how can a lowly Ruby developer build a bot that can roll with the punches like that? A big problem. Let's be realistic here. So when I pull back and I'm like, okay, I'm going to be really modest here and really kind of stop daydreaming, and I'm going to think about what do businesses value and how can I add value to the business. So what I've learned over the years, that most valuable things, if you're running a business, is it has to be predictable. You want things to be predictable. You don't like unpredictability. Furthermore, you value coherent behavior. You want all the representatives, anybody who is in your employ, to behave coherently. Something that is predictable, coherent, makes sense. It's along the lines of your business, whatever strategy and whatever else you're doing. And it needs to be consistent. It needs to be from day to day. No nasty surprises, no improvisation, no like, yeah, you may be a genius, but you're not paid to do that, right? So fully controllable behavior. That's what people who are paying us want from us. I mean, maybe some people don't like the whole, I'm creative. I'm like, well, maybe you shouldn't be working for a corporation. But that's what I'm seeing in my daily job. Okay, so being that as it may, now I'm thinking about communication protocols, and I break them down into 4 different categories, and I walk you through, so this will help us understand how I built the bot. And everybody, I hope, understands what communication protocol means. Do we need to elaborate? Yeah. So communication protocol is, to give you the most simplest example, if an airplane is approaching the control tower and wants to land, then they cannot just talk freely because they could be talking over each other and important details may get overlooked. It's life and death situation. So they have a protocol that they punctuate their conversation with keywords, Roger, over. That is a protocol, and it's pre-established. And everybody understands. Everybody understands when somebody says over, that means, okay, I'm now listening to you, I'm not gonna talk. And Roger, etc. So that is the simplest way, but we need that. We need to punctuate the conversation with certain keywords or certain rules and stick to it consistently. Therefore, we are guaranteeing that the communication is not going to break down. If we don't have that, all bets are off. As we've seen in previous examples with bots, where just like things go haywire. Okay, so the first level, the simplest, is the command protocol. So we have very specific direct commands. That is the simplest protocol. The second level is keyword protocol, where we have certain keywords in addition to commands. And I'll explain later how that relates. The third level, more complex, would be structured phrases. Certain structured phrases that also are pre-established beforehand, before we even get into the conversation. Both parties agree on these protocols, and both parties understand them. Otherwise, if they don't understand them, then the communication is running the risk of getting sidetracked and dying or whatever. And lastly, the fourth communication protocol is the free-form, informal, anything goes chit-chat. So these are 4 in the order of formalized or complexity as I've listed them. So let's quickly go over each one. The command protocol is, many of you are familiar with the command line interface. So we go into our command line interface and we issue commands. Change directory, make directory. These are all commands that we are giving to the machine. And we know that protocol. And why? Because we have attended educational courses and we've learned that this is what machines expect from us. So we've memorized, right? So most of us here probably know how to use command line interface to a certain degree or more or less. Also, there is an escape syntax. So the commands have also syntax. They're not just like necessarily just single words. And so in the word of this kind of communication protocols, we can agree that certain special symbol like this / or at or hashtag or exclamation point are signaling escape. So that's an escape syntax. And an example would be /help or @help or #help. So that is a special signal to the machine that now we want something specific. And it's a predefined meaning of that. Also, very importantly, these commands are globally scoped. So they don't depend on the context. The context may change wildly. They always mean one and the same thing. A good example is Git. How many people here use Git? So Git is actually an awesome bot, chatbot. I love it and it's fantastic. And that's a really good role model for what the chatbot could be. And I'm chatting with Git and it's really a good servant. It's doing a lot of good things for me. And it's also very good at letting me know that I made some mistake. Maybe you meant this, maybe, it's awesome. I really love it. I think it's fantastic. But it presupposes a very, very narrow context, which I'm actually managing versions of some content, and also I'm proposing some changes that other people should review. So it's a fantastic bot, knows all about it. And if you learn the syntax and the protocol, Git is gonna serve you well. And you can do fantastic things really fast. So here's hoping that we can build other bots like Git, that they can really do a lot of useful things for us by us simply chatting with them without having to drag and drop and you know, find those tabs, blah, blah, blah. Anyway, moving to the conversation context. So Git does not really have much of a context sensitivity. It's very straightforward, knee-jerk. But the keyword protocol, which is the second level of complexity, serves to alert the bot or the machine that the context of the conversation has suddenly changed. So the machine may be thinking, okay, we're working on this and I'm working diligently and I'm gonna do everything for you. Bam, all of a sudden there's a context switch. And we need to let the machine know that the context has changed. So for example, there may be a conversation going on, and all of a sudden the user will throw in the word @doctor. So that is a keyword that has been pre-established. And now the bot realizes, wait a minute, I'm not finding this @doctor in my list of commands. Therefore, I'm going to bail out of my command mode, and I'm going to flip over into the searching for keywords. So now I'm abandoning the simple path. I'm going to a more hairier environment. Let me see if I see this thing @doctor in my keywords. And if the bot finds the keyword doctor, then within this new context, it might pick up the appropriate action. It might say, oh, you would like me to see if I can schedule an appointment with your doctor, or what else would you like me to do? But now it's totally kind of made the shift into a different area. And so that's one of the ways that we can kind of control and make this conversation more predictable, instead of hoping that somehow this bot will magically figure out what is it that we actually want. So it has to be a bit more formalized. Onto the more complex structured phrase protocol, which now, of course, much less formal, because it's, you know, it could be more elaborate, a string of words, etc. And therefore, it's less predictable, less controllable, and less repeatable than the keywords. But it's also very useful for enhancing the flow, because with this kind of stirring commands and keywords, the conversational flow is not really there, right? You're almost like programming the machine, and it requires a certain level of formal training, almost. But you want to be also able to do things a little bit more in human-like fashion, so you want to throw a couple of phrases and whatnot, and hopefully that could resonate with the machine, and the machine should be able to interpret what actually does that mean. But also, we need to always be cognizant at this level of technology. I think it needs to be used judiciously, because it can escalate into some weird spiral, and then we don't know how to go back. We don't know how to pull back, and the software may go into some dark corners we just cannot bail out. And lastly, the free-form, informal protocol. Yes? An example would be anything. It just has to be pre-programmed. So it could be like a sentence that says, sentence that says, could you please call me a cab? You know, instead of just being @cab, right? Which basically boils down to the same thing. It's just a more natural way of expressing yourself. Yes, exactly. But it's expressed in a more, instead of being very syntax being very rigid, it is more like human-like. So you can even have few sentences, but they all boil down to the command @doctor or @cab, right? But now the challenge is on the machine to boil it down to say, oh, I know what you mean. You actually want me to call a cab, right? But we give the users a better conversational interface where we allow them to express themselves more human-like. Even also if they're talking, it's voice recognition, then it helps if we allow for that kind of flow. And the free form, informal, there will be, of course, messages that the bot will receive that will not contain commands, no keywords, no structured phrases. And at that point, the challenge is how do we cope with that? Because we won't be able, none of the previous methods of dealing will be useful to us. We will be like left out in the cold. So sometimes you see a lot of people do honesty is the best policy, and they say, like that bot that I show you, oh, I'm willing to learn, which is just basically saying, I don't know, right? But it turns out people often think it's a cop-out. It's like, oh yeah, I mean, you're just pretending you're going to learn, but we know you're not going to learn anything about it. This is just BS. So that's not a very effective way of dealing with that, right? I think maybe better to meet the user halfway or something like that, not just kind of throw the towel in and say, I don't know, I'll try harder next time, I promise. Some people fake it till you make it and all that. Obviously, history has shown so far that that doesn't work. All these attempts kind of just peter out and never gain any significant traction. Another thing that is very important that we have discovered with this conversational interface, there are many risks and pitfalls. There are many prank calls. That's human nature. You can't help it. All teenagers and whatnot, I don't know. I have no idea. I'm not judging. But they like to prank the bot. If you look at the logs, it's a lot of these prank calls and whatnot. Malicious calls, people trying to, I've seen, when I was testing my bot, I've seen people trying to get the bot to say something racist or homophobic, and it's really malicious. And then they take a screenshot and then they will publish it, right? So as a reputable corporation, such as Staples, we can't let that happen, right? This is just like huge scandal. But it's totally open to abuse, right? So we see here that those messages that we don't catch as being commands, keywords, predefined phrases, we need to scrub them. We cannot just like take them at face value, try and process them, see what comes out. And you probably heard last year there was a big scandal with Microsoft bot that they co-opted, and they taught the bot all kinds of nasty things. So that's something to keep in mind, of course. So one thing we did was I built this service called Protocol, Mickey Mouse name. But basically, it allows you to scrub. It's in early beta and whatnot, but it is crowdsourcing, blah, 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 grassroots community, Wikipedia style. So anybody can go in and can actually supply various variations on various sentiments and various ways people would phrase something tricky, so that we can scrub against and say, oh, I see this now. Actually, this means that somebody is bored, or somebody's getting angry, or somebody is getting upset. But I can also be multilingual. I'm working with some people in France who are interested in. France is big on, believe it or not, on this technology, but they, for some reason, the agencies I've been working with, they think that they just want to serve France. They just want to use French. They don't care about English. And I strongly recommend, if anybody here has good sense of humor, to really not hold back. Humor is good, and it really helps a lot. But also we have to be careful, because sometimes we've seen situations where I think one One example was when somebody sent a message to the bot saying, I've just been assaulted or something, I don't know what to do. And the bot says, well, we can't know everything. You know, it's awful, right? So sensitivity training, and a friend of mine, she's a medical specialist. She spent a lot of years working with people in crisis downtown East Side. And we were also thinking about maybe eventually building a platform that will scrub those things and detect those cries for help and not take them lightly, not take them humorously. It's a fine line, right? You don't know really when it's a prank, when somebody's really at the end of their rope. But people will reach at 3 a.m. to a bot in the hope of staying alive and continuing to live. So we as a community are very, very responsible for making sure we don't mess up on that, if you get the guess that point. It's a very strong message I want to send. I'm not seeing anybody doing it, but I think it's super, super important. We have a lot of people in crisis, and they more and more rely on their mobile device to one way or another reach out for help. Okay, enough of the, yes? Oh, like,
Can you just repeat that? Can you just repeat a bit of that for the mic? Sorry, just repeat a bit of that for the mic.
sorry, which one?
Just repeat the.
So I'm sorry, I don't know your name. I'll either mention there is a bot, and yeah, there is a number of bots. The problem is, they are so super hard to find, right? We need a bit more of a unified resource where, you know, like if I'm building a bot, I should know about that. It should be like almost like Wikipedia. Today, if I want to check something, look something up, I'm going to go to Wikipedia. I think we need Wikipedia resource for these kinds of things so that everybody knows. Don't even try and build your own custom. There is a resource out there. You can send your message and you can scrub it and you can see what actually comes back. Sorry, back. So yeah, I mean, the thing is very, very early stages. People have tried last year to, there's a lot of these like big propaganda media blitz that say, okay, bots are gonna kill all the apps, blah, blah, blah. It never happened, right? So I'm saying this is very, very early stages. How are we doing for time? Okay. So let's look at some, yes?
So at the beginning, you argued that the bot of the text interface is a more natural video interface for the user. Then you argued, however, that the free-form speech is like in the future. So then you have the command-like interface. So, but would you argue that the command-like interface is more natural for the user than the GUI interface? Because like you have to use like a command, like a Git-like language for every application, which seems to me way more complicated than a user interface like we have today.
Yes, you're totally right. What we are seeing in the past, I don't know, let's say 5 years, is people are being onboarded onto social media and being onboarded onto the messaging channels. And then the next thing you see is people are being educated and conditioned to start using more formal language. So even somebody's grandma is now using hashtags, and the grandma understands what the hashtag means. Now, when you use a hashtag, you're actually talking to the machine. You're not talking to people. So obviously, population at large is ready and willing and able to adopt certain formal training if they want to get something useful out of the machinery. So not everything has to be for dummies, for idiots. People are slowly learning the ropes, and in that direction, we are seeing that people will be learning to use character, hashtag, and then knowing what that means and how that affects the machine and how you can actually take advantage of all this power under your fingertips that otherwise you wouldn't be able to do unless you really learn what hashtag means. So that just put in the door, right? But it's going in that direction. And there is also hoping that people will be able to gain more formal training, and not everything is like, well, I don't even know what computer is, right?
But my point is just to use Git, like there are books about it, but to have a command interface to book a flight, set your alarm, do all these things together. To me, that seems like an easy to compress and to learn.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's insane to think that, right? But also what it does, it conditions people to think that when you're talking to machines, you adopt a little bit different attitude, right? So it becomes natural. Before that, when we were not exposed to machines, we would never think that. But little by little, we're seeing that everybody, the population at large, is learning the ropes and is realizing, oh man, I mean, if I just spend a little bit more time gaining some skills, I can benefit a lot personally, right? Another thing is that with graphical user interface, people are getting frustrated because each and every app has a completely different protocol. And each and every app you have to learn from scratch. And then even if you learn it, you come back and you're like, what the hell? I know last time I was able to do this, but now I can't remember. So it's not very, graphical user interface can be very infuriating. And people call me like, oh, how do I do this? I was able to do this and that, but now I can't even find my way. So, I'll explain later what, there is a dichotomy and there is a very important point, but it's kind of beyond the scope of this presentation. I'll be giving a talk in London next month, which is completely focused on that, what you're saying, where the next step is going. It's a big tech conference, Tech Week in London next month. I'll be there on June 13th. Okay, any other questions so far? So a little bit of code. I'm going to show you bad code. That's not a challenge at all. Something like this, right? Everybody kind of agrees this is bad code. Or maybe some people think it's good code, I don't know. Or something like this. These are all real world, I kind of, maybe it's not fair, doesn't matter who did it, but I grabbed it from the repo. Okay, what's wrong with that code? So there's a number of things. The code we've seen is difficult to find. Like if somebody says, oh, we need to fix that, where do I find this? It's a big jungle. It's difficult to read because there's all these like nested conditional statements all over the place, a big jungle of spaghetti code, basically. It's difficult to reason about, like, oh, what is this doing? What is this supposed to do? If somebody asks us to modify, we'll be like, ooh, I don't know, very difficult to modify. I can try, but I'm not guaranteeing anything because I have no idea what this thing is doing. If something's wrong, somebody asks, can you troubleshoot this? I'm like, oh my God, there's so many possible things that can go wrong here. Debug and step through, it's like, I don't know what's going on. Very difficult to document, very difficult to estimate impact of even of a slightest change. You don't know, like, okay, maybe when I do this change and I try it here, it seems to be working, but God knows if we now put it in this other environment, whether something else breaks. So it's a very, very bad situation. I hope everybody agrees. So now the question is there a better way? And in particular, I want to talk about if we are using Ruby, how would we implement some kind of a deterministic conversational workflow? Just specifically with Ruby, because every language has their own kind of maybe quirks. So let's maybe start with a very simple scenario. This is completely hypothetical. The user or shopper asks to see the catalog. So I'm using retail. Like, okay, I want to see the catalog, you're selling boots or whatever. The bot then messages back the catalog to the user. Here's the catalog. The user now picks an item from the catalog, sends it to the bot as a text message. Now bot receives this catalog, this item, and checks if the user chose an existing item from the catalog, or if the user said something completely unrelated, because that's a possibility. Why is that a possibility? Because it's a free-form text input field. You can put anything in there. There's no restrictions or constraints on what you can type or say. Okay, so here's a nice little heartwarming quote from Eric Elliott, the guy I kind of like to follow. He says, the process of software development is breaking down large problems into smaller problems. So we take a large problem, break it down to smaller problems, and then we build components around each of the smaller problems. Then we take those components and compose them together to form a complete application or a solution. So that's basically what we are, the guiding principle here. So we have a big problem, break it down to smaller, implement each smaller as a component or a Lego block, and use those components and assemble a solution. Everybody on board with that? Makes sense. Eric Elliott is good. Okay, but first I want to go quickly over the bot architecture, because it's important for us to understand how does bot architecture look like. There are two layers in the bot architecture. One layer is called commodity layer. Another layer is called core competence layer. The commodity layer consists of all these things we're familiar with, like messaging channels, whether it's been SMS or Messenger, WhatsApp, Slack, millions of these channels. There's also all these like natural language processing and understanding libraries and services, as well as computing infrastructure, servers, clients, message queues, blah, blah, blah. The whole slew of commodities and infrastructure-related things that we can subscribe to, dime a dozen, no big deal, no competitive advantage. Everybody in the world has them, big whoop. But where we differentiate ourselves from the competition is now how we deal with our core competence layer. And this is what separates men from boys. So the business application domain-specific code, the business entities, and the business operation. This is where the rubber meets the road, basically. And this is what we are now talking about. So if we zoom into the business operations, we see that it consists of these 6 areas: the dispatching, authentication and authorization, validation, the rules and processing logic, persistence, and response. So everybody cool with that? I don't think I've missed anything. If I have, please let me know. If we now zoom into the business entities, for this particular case, we're talking about a user or a customer. A user owns one or more conversations, and there is a context to the conversation. So a conversation can go through various contexts, a single conversation. That's as far as, I can break it down and simplify it to this kind of bare bones. The conversation itself, of course, belongs to the user, remembers everything that happens, naturally. All the replies to the user is also logged and remembered. Also, it is responsible for declaring the next step, which drives the workflow. So what is the next step? Basically, when the bot receives a message, the bot now is governed by the business logic, which is determined by the stakeholders and people who are responsible for the business. And they say, okay, if this message arrives, I want that to happen. This is my expectation. I expect this to happen. And this thing that is the expectation is called next step. I want to see the next step being exactly like this, right? So how do we implement this next step? If we use imperative approach, we end up with this crazy kung fu unmanageable mess. Spaghetti code, there's going to be millions of these if else but then, blah, blah. So it's crazy. It's just not feasible at all. So we prefer to use the declarative approach and try and declare as much as possible as the knowledge we have about the system, instead of having this kind of heavy lifting imperative, like, no, do this, but or do that, right? So we want to compartmentalize processing logic into isolated components, which we talked about with Eliot's quote. So break it down into segregated, isolated, compartmentalized components. And how many people here are familiar with REST? So we can draw parallels with REST. Now the question is, why do we draw parallels? Why don't we just use REST? Well, we can't, because REST is a web-based architecture. The bots are not web-based. So we lose that commodity. We lose that advantage that the web is giving us, as well as, most importantly, the Hades. How many people know what Hades is? Few people? Okay, I'll explain quickly. So in REST, if we're dealing with REST, then the isolation happens at the resource level. This is how we isolate and divide and conquer in REST. And everybody knows that. We've been building REST apps for years now. And then Hades. What does Hades stand for? Anybody knows? Hypermedia as the engine of application state. So in REST, the engine that is controlling the workflow is encapsulated in hypermedia or hypertext. So that is an incredibly powerful technology, probably the most powerful technology high-tech ever invented. And we've been using Hades in REST, and it's just amazing. Sadly, when we switch to bots, we lose Hades. It's just gone. We can't do it. So what I'm trying to do is, how can I now emulate Hades? Because I'm so used to it. I missed the guy, and he's gone. So let's just quickly go through the building blocks. And I mean, there's so much to cover, but I will just show you a few, just to illustrate how things are being handled. So we need, as we talk, we need to break things down into isolated components before we start assembling them into a solution. We are attacking smaller problems. So this, again, the methodology I'm using is use case driven. So we need to have use cases. We cannot just fantasize things. So I'm working off use cases which have been vetted by business people who say, okay, this is what I expect to see. Because I cannot, as a developer, I cannot decide what is the expectation. That's not my job. So each use case encapsulates one component. So it's a one-to-one mapping, use case to component. So the first component that we can create is called, I call it process catalog selection. And if you go back to documentation, to the specification, you will find the use case with the same name. There's just not, there's just spaces between the word process and catalog and selection. So somebody has decided that this is the use case that we need to implement. All right. So it's a very simple component. It has only one capability, which I call do it or whatever, the Nike slogan. And in here, I will quickly just walk you through. Basically, this component is declarative, so it declares the next step. So right off the bat, the component is saying, I'm going to process this, and all I'm going to do is knee-jerk declare the next step is called take item selection. And take item selection is another use case. So it's very, very kind of hardwired, knee-jerk, no big whoop, no intelligence at all. And then here, okay, this is basically the way we persist it and then return the result. So it's a very simple component, but we like them simple and stupid because there is no surprises there. And if, what can go wrong here? Very little. We basically declare next step is take item selection. Okay, take item selection is a bit more involved. And in real life, it's not like this. I just summarized it for this presentation, but it's much more chopped into smaller little thingies. But just walk you through here is, again, this component also is very single-minded. It just has one capability, do it. It's going to take parameters, it's going to do it. But it's going to now do a little bit of like thinking. It's going to say, First of all, I'm gonna preemptively say, sorry, I'm assuming that something went wrong. So it's very fail fast. It's like, I'm pretty sure that something's gonna mess up. So it's gonna say, sorry, I cannot find your catalog. Please try again or type cancel if you want to start all over again. So there's in case of panic break class event. And then it also assumes that selected item is nil. So it's assuming failure. It's just saying, okay, well, I'm pretty sure nothing's going to happen, but let's see what goes on. It's now looking into trying to find the item by the ID. If it fails, it's going to try to find the item by the name. And then if the selected item is not found, it's going to kind of recursively say, okay, do it again, try again. If the item is found, it's going to now move into processing the order. Say, okay, we have a live one, we gotta roll with the punches here. It's gonna actually formulate a response to the user and say, all right, now that you picked a pair of boots or whatever, you picked a t-shirt, how many would you like? So this is now the canned response that we're sending back to the user. And now we are declaring the next step because everything's kosher. We're saying, take item quantity. Now we need to grab a quantity. And we're going to persist that because we're going to log. We keep track of absolutely everything. Take item quantity. And to cut a long story short, I mean, there's so many of these things. Yes. Yeah, sure. I won't take much longer. And so on and on. You can imagine there's so much that has to drive this conversation, of course. So the only thing that I want to now explain furthermore, you can imagine other components, and we really like to keep them dumb and small. How do we execute this workflow? Because we don't have the web architecture that will allow us to formulate the hypermedia, and then this hypermedia will actually drive the process. We don't have that. We just have plain text, which is just really, really impoverished medium, right? So we did how many people here are doing web development? So everybody's pretty much familiar with the concept of the controller, right? So the controller with dispatching and whatnot. So we need a dispatcher of our own, just like built from scratch. So I'm just building something, I call it entry, and it has a single method dispatch. That's all it does. So what this thing does is it basically accepts the text message as it arrives, figures out, and again, this is not how it really is implemented. I just kind of summarize it here for you. It tries to find the user. If the user is not found, it's going to go into onboarding thing, right? Because that's the business requirement. You need to onboard the user before they can start shopping. Then it's trying, if it finds the user, trying to determine the context. And if the context is kind of wide open, nothing specific, then it's going to go into the next step and see if the next step is specific. Next step could be nothing, which now means I either check for cancellation, maybe the user decided to cancel, bail out, and go back, reset to square one, or I will now actually execute the next step. Otherwise, if the next step is nothing, so there is no next step, I'm going to fall through. So now I'm abandoning keyword or those more strict communication protocols. I'm dropping down to I'm abandoning commands. I'm dropping down to keyword or banter. So by banter, I mean freeform, just BS. And then it takes a different turn. So in here, you see there's a dispatch, a controller that will kind of do the heavy lifting and deal with each incoming message. Because the problem with bots, the architecture is that each incoming message is, even if we've been talking to the user for hours, each one is seen as coming in for the first time, right? And we always have to figure out, okay, is this a brand new user or are we continuing where we left off? So in a nutshell, that's where we are dealing with our business operations and processing logic. So as you can see, the main engine runs on 2 lines of code, which courtesy of Ruby, which the Ruby can allow us to constantize the class name and then to instantiate it with passing parameters in. So that's awesome. It creates a simple, easy to read code, and we can, on the fly, just bootstrap ourselves into all these different components, let them run their course, see what happens next. And this, in a nutshell, is the engine. Okay, and also, where is the next step coming from, right? That's another thing. We are, as you recall, we are persisting it, and then on the next re-entry, we are trying to fetch it. Because we have the user, we have the handle to the user conversations, we're looking at the last message, and we are grabbing the next step. Simple as that. Okay, we have this kind of publication bots for businesses if anyone is interested. Any questions at this point?
Yeah. When you were mentioning text throat as your message of entry, were you talking like SMS, actual phone texting?
It could be Messenger, it could be Slack, because it does not, this bot does not assume any operational interface. Text is text. It may be arriving from all kinds of, could be email, could be any channel imaginable, could be voice, that now hits the bot, and the bot is saying, okay, now that I have this text, let me go through all these like layers. Is it a command? Is it a keyword? Is it a banter? Whatever. But you know, it is not tied to any particular channel of delivery.
How is what you're describing a state machine managed state of the conversation? Is there advantages of doing it the way you're describing this?
I just found state machine to be a bit over my head in terms of being able to reason about it, grasp it. It tends to mushroom into something else when I'm working with a team. This I found to be much more crisp and much more like dumb, and I like things dumb and not super advanced and sophisticated. That way we're staying close to the bare metal, and you know, I don't like things mushrooming into very complex, fancy, because then next thing you know is like, oh, we don't know why this happened, and then we have to spend weekends shooting. So as much as we can, we stay close to the ground, right? Any other questions?
Yep. So I'm not sure if you can answer. What are you using this for? As like at Staples, for example. Okay, you give 2 examples where like a pure text-based interface this would be enough, or good.
Yeah, at Staples, I mean, it's a long story, and I cannot really discuss in details, but it's a large 60,000 employees worldwide, a large organization. Tens of thousands of SKUs and things on for sale, and it's all kinds of very, very complex operation. And what's happening is we have a lot of customers having follow-up calls, or even having just cold calls. And this is a challenge for the business to scale, because you know sometimes you try and outsource to India, some call center doesn't really work well. Try to man the floor with people who'll be answering emails, falls apart, just too much volume. So the initial idea would be to let people sort of like 1-800 number, but instead of phoning, text to this number or to at Staples, whatever it is, and just say, hey, Staples, what's happening with my order? I've ordered last week, I haven't received anything, here's my order number. And then the bot will grab the number and check and maybe respond, or maybe escalate to a human. But the first line of defense would be automated text-driven interaction with customers to be able to cope with growing incoming calls, which is just tends to keep getting bigger and bigger and bigger, right? Scalability is the main at this point. Now later on, if let's say if this technology becomes mature and really proves itself, then of course everybody wants to use it as a concierge to improve selling, to start pushing things on people, get people engaged, chatting, and hey, did you know you can do this, you can do blah blah blah. But at this point, I think it's still early in the game, and I'm not seeing much traction in that way. But if at least you can cut your costs in your customer support calls, and also reduce the frustration, because as you can imagine, if people call or send email and they don't get response in like 48 hours, they become really upset. Like, look, I paid for this, I'm not getting, nobody's responding back to me, what's going on? And so one of the ideas is to have this line of defense, which is fully automated, which doesn't take bathroom breaks or vacation, and just always available. You can text to it, etc. So in a nutshell, that's what the business model at this early stage is kind of envisioned maybe to be. But like I said, you need to really worry about all these nasty edge cases where things spiral out of control. Unlike a graphical interface where you can really constrain the interaction, and you can say, okay, here's the next step can only be this and nothing else. Therefore, you feel comfortable offering that service to the population. With text, you cannot guarantee that. You cannot say, oh, I'm sure the user's not going to say this. Yeah, no. And then if there's something comes in that you don't know, and it falls through the cracks, and then all of a sudden blows in your face, like we talked about when somebody says, I got assaulted, what should I do? Well, we can't know everything. That's not a good response for the reputable business. So.
Definitely, I like the idea of the Google Assistant button. It gives you like a few options that you can just click on, which
that is not. I disagree with that, because then why not offer an app? That's an app, right? That's not text. The whole idea is, I mean, either you have an app with buttons and carousel and whatnot, and that's awesome. That's great. But that has certain limitations, right? Or if you wanna open up for chat, then you don't need an app. Either or, like any of these bots that offer like click here, that's an app, right? But I'd much rather have a full-blown app that I can do everything in the app. But why would I do a hybrid? So it doesn't seem to be gaining much traction, because people get confused. You can enter text or you can push something, like, okay, what do I do here, right? So it's a bit of a cognitive dissonance. Apparently not a good model. So, yes.
What about multiple choice with over the test? Like ABC, like the options available.
Yeah.
Well, I think it's still conversational. Kind of.
Oh yeah. You can. Yeah. When I mentioned catalog, for example, you can, or menu, like you're ordering pizza, you can have like 12 options, and you can type number 9, and say, fine, how many pizzas would you like, right? Or but you can always have these simple answers, like sentence number 5 if you'd like anchovies or something like that, right? So that's a very simplistic way to bypass graphical and just allow bare bones text coming in. And if you remember the code, it's checking. First thing it's checking is to see a numerical value, if it's an item ID or some. If not, drops down. Oh, let me check by the name. If not the name, let me check if it's a bit more, longer sentence and so forth. So yeah, absolutely.
Do one more question.
Yeah.
Do you have any other kind of system that you are running?
What do you mean by that?
Broad organization of the whole.
Yeah, one interesting thing also that we are toying with is Slack bots, which are internal within the organization. And oftentimes, even if we are not comfortable offering a fully automated customer support as a bot. So the call comes into the call center, and oftentimes it's challenging for the human customer representative to find the answer. So if we have a Slack bot that they can talk to, hey, can you tell me the status of this order number? Let's quickly into a Slack, and the bot can go and check in the database and say, yeah, it's been shipped, it's on the route, then that also it helps a lot operationally, right? So not all bots need to be like out there into the open. Some of them can be internally serving to simplify the workflow within the organization. And Slack is a pretty good platform for that. We find Slack to be pretty sophisticated and doing a lot of work in that regard, enabling chatbots on various. I don't know if you use Slack, but it's all these channels and people. So you're talking to your coworkers, but you can also talk to a bot. You can just say just say at order fulfillment. What's the status of this? Here's the order number. That's fairly, because now you can train your staff, right? Say, okay, don't chat with the bot, just give them order number and use this sign and the bot will know what to do, right? That's way easier than if you're just opening up to the general public. And, then all bets are off, right? So that's where we are at this point. And of course, we looked at other technologies and whatnot, but I find Ruby to be very good fit for this type of, at least prototyping. Okay.
Awesome. Thanks very much, Alex. That was great. Let's give Alex a round of applause. I guess if people want to follow you, they can find you on Twitter or Medium. Great. Thanks very much for coming. So we'll hang out for maybe 15, 20 more minutes, and then we'll see you next month. See you later.